Hello and welcome to Sheffield Banjo Lessons, where today's lesson is going to be looking all about licks on the banjo. And we're going to have to discover the general world of what a lick is, aren't we really? And then we'll look at what on earth do we do to build them and use them. And that's what today's lesson is going to really be about. And we'll split this lesson down between us. And what we'll learn is what is a lick, right? What's the components of it? And then when do we use those licks? When's a suitable time to use them? When's not such a suitable time? And then also, which one do we use and how do we make that decision? What makes it appropriate for a certain situation or not? And to do that, we'll spend a little bit of time deconstructing a lick and kind of finding that secret recipe for what a lick actually is. And we'll delve into a little bit of the theory as well, where we'll educate ourselves and we'll learn the knowledge so that we know how to piece them together. And then we'll look at flavouring them too. So we'll look at what makes a bluegrass lick or a bluesy lick. And then you'll be able to get these elements in your hand and really unlock the level of playing and your ability to just craft licks on the fly and get straight through with them. So if you enjoy it, please hit like, please hit subscribe, leave me a comment below and let me know how you get on with the licks today, whether you enjoy the ones we play or whether you enjoy creating your own as well. And if you want the tabs from today, please remember to check out in the description, there's the links to the Patreon page where there's the different memberships and you'll be able to get all the different tabs for the licks we've used today. Or there'll be the Ko-Fi page where you can support the channel by buying a cup of coffee, or you can download the tabs as well, or it'll take you through to my website, www.sheffieldbanjolessons.co.uk, and in there you'll be able to download the licks page as well as all the other songs, and it's all done in your local currency, so don't worry about that. Okay, so with that in mind then let's look all about licks. Let's first of all look at what is a lick. And when I ask my students what is a lick, I've been greeted with some wonderful responses with, it's just a lick, isn't it? And it's a bit of banjo faff. And also, it's a phrase between parts. And we're kind of getting there right with the idea. These all loosely make sense when you sort of think about what might come into your mind when you think of a lick. So have a think. What do you think a lick is before we get into this? And maybe jot it down and see if you can change your understanding by the end. Or maybe we just sort of confirm what you were on about before. So if we have a look at what some of the sort of the masters say, well, Tony Trischka describes a lick as a stock pattern or phrase, which is sort of consisting of a short series of notes. And a slightly longer one from the Deering website describes a lick as a small musical passage that you will have down 100% in your fingers. And it will be that you know so well that you can always pull it out of your back pocket and use it in certain musical situations. They can be just a couple of notes, a half measure, a full measure, 2 measures or more. But most often they are no longer than about 2 measures and often just a few notes. So the Deering description is quite a full description, and the Tony Trischka one is kind of where we want to start with, right? So let's think about what is a lick. Well, it is that sort of idea. When you think of a lick, you think of a nice active sort of bluegrassy sound, and you might have something like this. Right, so it's just sort of a little bit of a something that goes on in between. But what makes a lick then, and when do we use them? Well, a lick can be anything that is just a handful of notes, as we've just heard, or it can be generally a bar, a measure, or maybe even 2. And what we're going to do is we're going to have these where they're a small passage of play that's suitable for the song that we're playing in. And we're going to use them to sort of fill spaces in a piece of music. So maybe if you've got a melody that's just finished and we've got a bit of space between where the next melody picks up or the end of the bar, we might have one of these short phrases that we can then pop into that song, and it helps keep that sort of bluegrass lilting banjo going. It might be that what we've got is we're playing some backup or some chord transitions, and we want to make it slightly more interesting as we move from one to another. We might want to then add in a lick there to just sort of spice it up a little bit. It might be that we're accompanying a mandolin player or a violin or a singer, and actually there's a little space between where their line's finished and where they're going to go next, and we might want to then drop a lick into that place. So we're going to use them to sort of predominantly embellish the sound of what's going on and fill it with a little bit of, we'll say, interest or intrigue. Now, when we think of licks, we generally think of this bluegrass style and this Earl Scruggs style, right? So we, rather than anything that's too melodic or anything like that, we think of them with having the hammer-ons in and working through the rolls and kind of just adding more, we'll say, prettiness but busyness to the pattern as it's going on, so that we don't have too many long, prolonged sort of gaps with it. And again, that is kind of like the world that we can lean into. Now I want you to think about Cripple Creek Part B and think of licks. So it's kind of just a bunch of sort of stock repeated phrases with something little pretty thing that's going in the background. But it actually kind of also involves the melody. So we're splitting between things here. So have a little listen. Right, you got the idea there. So each of those little phrases we could use as a little lick, a little bit that covers the space, or the end part. Right? And we might use that when we want to change a chord. So these are the sort of sounds we're going to get in our mind when we're playing them. So we don't want to use a lick to get in the way of the music. What we want to do is use it to embellish the music, whether it's around a little bit of a melody, whether it's a gap between phrases, or whether it's enhancing some of our backup or filling some space, right? That's what we want to do. What we don't want to do is be using our licks that's then going to interfere with the melody or the person that's singing or in the incorrect key. So, with that in mind, we now need to figure out, well, which lick do we use? And that's going to mean we're going to have to invoke dreaded theory. But we'll break it down, right? We'll break it down and make it a little bit easier today. So have a think. What makes a G-lick a G-lick? What makes a C-lick a C-lick, a D-lick a D-lick, and how many should I be learning? Well, in regards to how many should you learn, it's handy to have a few, as Deering say, in your back pocket, where you can pull them out in different situations. But to know how many that you think you may want to learn, we're going to need to then have a think about what is suitable in different situations. So you might have got maybe one or two prepared for each of those situations, okay? And with that, like I say, we need a bit of basic theory. So let's deconstruct this lick. Let's look at the recipe of how a lick is put together. And we're going to use this lick for now. Okay? And what that's going to be is a, well, actually, let's see. Can you figure it out? Let me play this again for you. Have a think. What components do we have in there, right? Can you hear a different roll? Can you hear a different technique or a certain note or anything like that? Okay. Well, now listen to this one. Hear the difference. Really similar to the other, right? Okay, well, what they both involve is a forward-backward roll. So thinking about our recipe now, this is the first ingredient that we can put into a lick when you want to sort of demystify it and think about where to build it from. So we'll think about one measure now, one bar, and what we've got is our forward-backward roll or forward-reverse roll. And that's going to be the strings 3, 2, 1, 5, 1, 2, 3, 1, right? And we're going to build around that. So we don't need to worry about being able to sort of improvise with the right hand if we're not there just yet. But what did we put in it in that case, right? Well, let's go back. Oh, okay. Well, I've now got my second ingredient. I've put a technique in there. So I'm having a 2-4 slide over that first note in the roll. We've now built our first addition to this roll to start creating a lick. And what we've got with that then, like I say, it's a 2-4 slide, and it brings out that little bit more of a sort of bright, nimble, agile sound to the banjo. And, well, why does that 2-4 work? Well, we're playing a lick in G. This is a lick that's suitable for anything that's either in the key of G or over the chord of G, right? And what we need to know is a little bit about scales to see why that note fits. So if we're thinking about the G major scale, if you don't know it, it's worth learning, and we'll have a quick look at it now. And we're going to have G, A, which is the 2nd fret, B, which is the 4th, C, which is the 5th, D, which is the 7th, then E, which is the 9th, and then we're going to shoot through to F sharp, which is the 11th, and then it recycles back again at the 12th, or the octave, with another G. So we had the notes in run, and then we've just seen the notes sort of heard in a slightly different manner around the sort of first 5 frets. So if we know that those notes are available for us and correct, we'll say, for a G, well, we can use them in our G lick. Right, and this is what we've done. So over our forward-backward roll, we've added in a 2-4 slide, which we've seen is the A and the B, which are the first 3 notes in our G major scale. And we could do that with any others. We could do it with 4-5. They'd all be available for us to make a lick, put a lick together in the correct key. Okay, well, what about the other component we had then? If we've got the roll, we've added a technique that's in the key, well, in the backwards roll we did something else, didn't we? Have a listen. So, all I've done at that point is the backward component or the reverse component of the roll, which is using strings 1, 2, 3, and 1. Well, when I've come back down to string 3, I'm adding a scale note in. So it's that same theory again of needing to know just loose bits of your scales around the key that you're playing in. And it's that A note, that 2nd fret on string 3 on the G string. And I've just added that in so that it's different to a standard open roll. A standard reverse would be, but I'm adding that 2nd fret in to give it a different sort of voice. And then it lets me usually drop, for instance, if it's going back to a C chord or a G chord, I might be using that G string again. And it's giving me that idea I can drop to it. Okay, so let's now just take stock and build that recipe again of how we can build licks. We've got our roll, because we're going to choose to do 1 over a full bar. And we chose our forward reverse, forward backward roll. We looked at our scale. We looked at what notes are going to be available to us that are okay for the key of G, and we're playing it over the chord of G, so it really suits it. And we put a technique in there. So that 2-4 slide meant it was a slide in the scale, and it made it brighter and prettier and have a bit more interest. But then we also added an extra scale note in, and that was in the backwards roll on that 2nd fret. And that built the roll again, which is this. And as we heard earlier, it doesn't actually have to be an entire measure, an entire bar that this works through. You could just have one component of that. So let's keep the 2/4 slide, right? You could just have a little lick that was, or if we switch the roll aspects, let's put it in the alternating one, strings 3, 2, 5, 1, but we'll keep that 2/4 slide in there as that first note. You'll have heard that one a load, right? Again, back to Cripple Creek. And we can use that as another little lick that we can fill in a half measure, half bar, right? Cool. So hopefully this is starting to take shape a little bit of what the recipe is for a lick, or what a potential recipe is. You can do it with so many different things. Right, so what we'll now do though is think, that's how it worked for G. So what's the difference if I'm saying a C or a D lick, but am I in the key of G or am I in the key of C? So let's take a look at that now. Right, so a G lick versus a C lick. And I mentioned, we're going to have to think about which key we're playing in, as well as which chord we're playing. So if we're playing in the key of G, we're going to want the notes that are in that G scale, unless we're doing something derivative. So that's where we're going to stay, in that sandbox of G. If a song is in the key of C, it's going to have a different scale. So the C key, the C major scale, would be C, D, E, F, G, A, B, and then back through to the C. There'd be no F sharp in there. So if we're now wanting to keep the C chord in the key of G, all it means is we just need to make sure that we're going to use the notes that are more suitable for it if we're just writing it in a standard major way. So that means we're not going to have the F, we're going to have the F sharp in there. But we're going to flavour it with the C chord. So with this then, we're going to have a C chord, but I'm going to use a technique again, with it's going to be a hammer this time, and it's also going to create notes and use notes that are in the key of G, but we're putting it over a C chord, so it's more favourable, sounds better, is more suited, let's say, for if we're playing it over a C chord itself. So let's do an alternating roll now. And what we'll do is we're going to play an alternating roll with strings 3, 2, 5, 1, and then we'll do 4, 2, 5, 1. And what we're going to do is, for our first component, we're going to have the little C on. So that's first fret, second string, second fret, first string. But over my first note, I'm going to do a 0 to 2, an open to a second fret hammer. So again, remembering our G scale, G, second fret is A, they're notes we can use. So we're now going to bring in that as a hammer on into our C chord. Okay? So we're going to fret the rest of the C chord, but we're going to start with the 0 to 2 hammer. Okay? And then we said we could bring it in with strings 4, 2, 5, 1 to carry on for an 8 note, a full measure, right? You'll have seen this in songs before, but that's thoroughly suitable for a lick over a C chord. Okay, but what if we want to put two techniques in then? Let's see if we can make it a little bit spicier. Right, so let's do this 0 to 2, this open second fret hammer, on the G string. And listen for that. But on the second alternating pattern, the second 4 notes, I'm going to actually stay on 3, 2, 5, 1, but I'm going to take that second fret and do a pull off to the open string. Right? So let's see how that sounds. If we're staying just in that roll, right? And that will give us a lick in C. What we can always do as well is, let's give a scale note. Let's lift the second fret that's on the first string. Let's lift it and play an open G on the way back. We'll stay with that alternating, hammering in, pulling off out, but we're going to then lift as well. If you've got the video, you'll be able to see a little bit of this. If it's just the audio that you're listening to, you may want to think about checking out those tab pages that I was saying. You'll be able to download these and see them properly. Okay, so again, let's cover it. Hammering on into the 0 to 2 on string 3, alternating. Then on the next component, we're going to be doing pull off, and then we'll be lifting on string 1. And that would be thoroughly suitable for a lick over a C chord. That would work in the key of C because we're using all the notes that work in the key of C, but it uses all the notes in the key of G. And it's suitable because we're fretting this C chord already. And we're kind of expecting that sound when we get to it. So both of those work really, really well. And this is the sort of thing that you want to be thinking about when you're creating these licks. So what key are we in? What notes are available? What chords going on? And then you can build it from there, right? So let's do an example of a D lick now then. So D chord itself is a little one of those slightly tricky ones. So it's full 4-finger version, 4th fret, 2nd, 3rd and 4th as we go. But if we want to make it a bit more nimble, let's think about then doing something a little more straightforward. Okay, let's do, we'll keep it completely in key, and what we'll do is we'll do a hammer on from the 1st to the 3rd on string 2. And we'll think about doing a foggy mountain roll. Yeah, let's do that. So we'll do strings 2, 1, 2, 1, 5, 2, 1, 5. And I'm just going to do a 1st fret to 3rd fret hammer over that first one. So we're going to have... And then I'll be bringing the thumb down to play the 2nd string on the next. And then we'll have 5, 2, 1, 5. And that's thoroughly usable. Again, it uses all the notes that are in the G scale, but we're putting it over what suits more a D chord. And the reason that, right, so that looks completely different to the D chord we saw with the full boxy shape, right? Yeah, it's none of that. But what we're using in there is we're actually using the 1st fret, which is a C, the 3rd fret, which is a D, and we're hammering into that D. A D's in a D chord, it's in the G scale, and then we've got open 1st, which is a D again, and then we're just rolling through that using our drone G. So they're all notes that are super sort of available for us if we're thinking standard major and boxing ourselves in with that. And that's why that D lick then works. So let's make that more interesting now then. Let's do the first half of that sort of foggy. Let's keep that. And then let's go for strings 5, 3, 1, 5. We'll do an open to 2nd fret hammer on the 3rd string. So why does that one still work? Very quickly then, right, we've got our G scale. So it's this open to 2nd fret. We've heard that before, that's in our G scale. It also, that 2nd fret creates an A. And that A note is actually in our D chord. So we now have the A and the D that are in the D chord, both in the scale that's G, and that means then it's available for us in the key. It also means that it's suitable over the chord and favours the actual chord of D. Right, so that's the difference then. Let's recap it. Got a roll. We've added a technique in or two, which is in the scale. in the key, and then we've made it with potentially an extra scale note, and we've then fretted it favourable to the chord that we're playing, so it voices a little bit more sort of straightforward for us. Right, so with that in mind then, you can start crafting and creating your own licks. But what if we want to then think about maybe flavouring the licks a little bit? So that major chord was nice, yeah, the major scale gives it all those nice parts, but aren't we playing bluegrass? And don't we generally hear things more like... Right, those notes were different. Can you tell what's going on? Again, if you're in the audio version, listen. And if you're in the video version, let's take a look. I'm going to do two versions. Right, so we'll think about, again, that Cripple Creek Part B. I'm going to do two versions. I want you to hear the difference. Let's do first. Do you hear that? Let's do one then the other. Yeah. So what did I do differently there? Can you hear that difference? Instead of that, right? What the difference is there is we're starting to use blues notes. And this is, again, thinking more with a theory, we'll cover it in a second. But the idea that these blues notes are actually what's starting to flavour our lick away from just a major and nice bright sound, but into this bluegrass element. And this is the bit we almost all hear. And this is, you know, when you're thinking about it, if you're listening to any of the old recordings or the Scruggs recordings, like, you're going to see this time and time again, whether it's in your sheets that you're learning or just the sound of the banjo. It's not always in that major scale, but quite often we're veering from it and we're adapting it into a bluesy style or a bluegrass style. And that first note that comes from there that works is, if you saw it, it's the 3rd fret of the 3rd string. On its own, sounds a little odd. So we said the scale of G was open to 4, G, A, B. But now we've added a note in between, haven't we? It's that 3rd fret, which is a B flat. We've added that in now. Now on its own, just playing that open 2, 3, 4, and then 3, 2, 0, that's starting to sound bluesy in its own regard, right? And that's because what we've actually done is we've added this blues note, and the rule for adding your first blues note is you're going to take the 3rd note of that scale and you're going to flatten it. So that means push it back 1 fret or a half step or a half tone, whichever way you can think about it. And that's making that 4th fret, that B, get flattened to become a B flat. And actually, that's where we're now starting to use this and add it into the mix and the recipe of what we know for a lick. It starts to give the bluegrass flavour, right? Right? You hear that difference that it makes to what we're doing. And all we're doing is we're creating the bluegrass flavour by adding that flattened 3rd. And that is a rule you can just remember for any key that you're playing if you can build up that knowledge and theory. And it's really, really handy. So yeah, we're going to use it again straight away in that lick. We'll go forward. And on our backwards, let's do a 3-2 pull off and use it again. Super bluegrass lick right there. And all we're doing is we're changing that 4th fret, which is the 3rd of the scale, flattening it 1 semitone, which gives us the blues note. That gives us the 3rd fret, 2 to 3 slide on your forward roll, and on the backwards roll, 3 to 2 pull off. and it just becomes your most bluegrass of licks. Amazing. Right then. So with that in mind then, have a breath and have a think about the different rolls and have a think about the notes you've got. Maybe scratch a sheet of paper, scratch some ideas on a sheet of paper, and then think about where this blues note is and what you could sort of do with it and where you've seen it before. And thinking of that blues note then, let's think about, we found it in G by flattening the third of the scale. Shall we see if we can find it in C then? And then we can find the blues note if we're playing in the key of C, we might want to use that instead, right? Let's see. So a C is the first fret of the B string. And we want to go C, D, E. So that's frets 1, 3, then 5 for the scale. And we found our third note, which is that 5th fret. Okay, so what happens then if we flatten that? Sounds a bit awkward on its own, right? We're flattening the E to an E flat, or a D sharp, but it's on that 4th fret. Not quite as usable as much as you want. A little bit, but what we're going to do now is see where that note is elsewhere on the banjo to be able to be used. So, if you can remember how to tune your banjo, we have a D on the first string, right? So we've got a D on the 3rd fret of the 2nd string. So 0 and 3, if we think of the same sort of intervals, let's take that 4th fret, which is our flattened 3rd in the key of C. We find it on the 1st fret of our D string. Now, thinking of a C chord then, that's an E. Thinking of a C chord, what I'm going to be able to do, again you'll see this better on the video, is I'm now going to use string 4 and I'm going to take my index finger and I'm going to hammer on from the 1st to the 2nd fret and then drop back into the C chord. And then we've got this blues sort of note that we can use over C. You see how that then flavoured the chord? And what we did was just use that flattened 3rd, learning where that was in the scale, then adding it into that C chord, and we're suddenly getting that bluesy sound again that you can use whether it's in the licks or the backup. And this is really where the sort of formula comes for creating these licks. There is one more element we can add that kind of links all these things together as well. And if you're with me, take a breath, a little bit more theory, but we're going to put it in the hand so you can use it as well. Right, we've had our rolls, we've had our scales, we've had our techniques, we've had our blues note. Well, the last one that's really cool to flavour a lick is a 7th, or technically we're going to have a dominant 7th. So let's bring that to the G scale then. The G scale, it works all the way through to the F sharp and then the G, right? Yeah? So we're going to take this F sharp, which would normally give us a sort of loungy feel. So that's going to be, an F sharp is going to be, we'll play it on the 4th fret of the 1st string. That gives us a major 7th, which is, by adding that in, which gives us a really cool loungy chord. But I want a bluesy chord for our licks that we're going to write. Well, what we're going to do is we are going to add our 2nd note into our scale and adapt the major scale by creating a flattened 7th, which is called a dominant 7th. So all it means is that 4th fret gets flattened, so goes lower by 1 half tone, half step, 1 fret, which gives us an F. And then if you hear it now, we're starting to get, again, another bluesy thing. Think of like rock and roll stuff. Right? It's that sort of feeling, that sort of sound. That's the way that it's coming in. But we can use that style and that feel again in a lick. So let's build a lick with a seventh in it. Okay, let's go for forward backward roll. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this seventh note. It's available on it's an F, 3rd fret, D string, string 1. I'm going to use it on string 4 now. And I'm going to do a forward backward roll lick, so we'll still stay within one measure, one bar. I'm going to do forward with the 2-3 slide in it to keep the blues note in there, but on my way back I'm actually going to come down and play that dominant 7th, that 3rd fret on string 4, and let's see how that flavours it. You got that? Pretty bluesy, right? Pretty cool. You could do it where actually you have it on string 1. Out into a C. So you get all these 7th turnarounds that are really good for sort of building a chord change and lifting you, holding you. It sort of suspends you and then slingshots you into that next part. Right, so that's pretty cool. We like that. So that is then bringing in that 7th note as well. And you can apply that same theory to the C and to the D. But trying to just bring ourselves and sort of calm it back down a little bit, that's how we're constructing licks. The deconstruction, the recipe of a lick that we've used today. We've looked at where they fit in, which is generally kind of wherever there's space. You might want to make a song a bit brighter, you might want to have a little call and response from a singer, you might be playing a 12-bar blues that you then want to have a nice turnaround. We're going to build it by having a roll, learn that techniques and notes in scale can be used to build this, and flavour more than just a standard open roll over a chord. And then what we've done is we've learned how to flavour it in the blues way, or the bluegrass sort of style, by creating that flattened 3rd. And then the final component we added was actually just the dominant 7th, which sounds scary, but all it is taking that note back a fret and giving you that sound again that gives you the rock and roll-y, bluesy sort of style. And with that in mind, you can then start crafting your own licks. So that's what I'm going to ask you to do. I'm going to ask you to download some tab, if you can, blank sheets of tab, or just get a piece of paper and start discovering and writing your own rolls here, because that's where it really comes about. We said earlier, it's ideal if you can kind of remember 2 or 3 or have at least a couple of bits available as licks. And that doesn't have to be a full roll. It could just be a little technique that takes you through. It could be half a bar, just 3, 2, 5, 1, that then helps you lift into that next part of music, or fill in with something pretty and fun that you want to do, or flavour in a blues way. So I'm going to implore you to then just work on those. Find what you want. Download the tabs off of, like say, my site, whether it's on the Patreon, whether it's on Spotify. The links will be available for you, or YouTube. And get these licks, play around with them, see if you can remember any, but then see if you can write your own. And a good way if you want to sandbox yourself in and play is, why don't you check out the links that are going to be there to the 12-bar blues, the 12-bar backing track, and you can practice them along to those, and those tracks are available at different speeds and different tempos for you. And again, they're available with YouTube links, or you might be able to check them out on the Patreon page with your membership as well. And that is then bringing us to the end of what we're going to cover today, which is all about licks. So yeah, if you've enjoyed this, thank you for joining me. Do the usual dutiful, please do the like, the subscribe, chuck me a comment, tell me how you got on writing your own licks. Support the channel if you can. I do this for a living, so to keep me going, please help out as much as you can and as much as you wish by checking out all the different information and what have you that's about, and just generally the future podcasts, the future videos and everything that keep coming along. And let me know if there's anything that you want to see there as well. So, with that in mind, thanks for joining me and happy picking.